Happy Monday. I hope you had a great weekend and thank you for joining me for this week's Q&A. So as always, I will go over some of the questions I got from the community this week, as well as a couple things that came up in various coaching calls that I thought were worth sharing. So we will dive right in. All right, so the first one is in the leads category, like how do you find new roles? And the question that came out was, how important is networking in today's job market? And the reality is it just becomes more and more important, and if not critical, right? Networking was always the best way to do it, right? Even in when there was a good job market, knowing people, getting referrals has always been a best practice, right? So you should always be doing that. But in today's market, it pretty much is becoming a necessity. Finding some way to get a referral or an introduction to the hiring manager is basically a needed step because there are so many people applying, right? So we have this weird job market, which is there are absolutely people applying. There are a lot of people getting new jobs, all this stuff's going on, but there are a ton of people looking, right? And so you have this sort of supply excess, right? Which is kind of causing all the challenges when people are trying to find new jobs. And what that means is every time a job is posted, they get, 100, 200, 500 all in the first day, right? And so you know, two things happen, right? One is if you are number 483, even if you have the best resume in the world, like they're not going to find it because in the first 100, they're going to get, the dozen or 20 people that they want to interview, right? So if you're too late, it's not going to happen. Two, what's happening is, and this is kind of LinkedIn's fault a little bit, but basically with these easy applies and there's all these auto appliers now, like there's a flood of resumes that actually are not very good. So the recruiters or the technical recruiters in the HR departments are getting flooded with resumes that just aren't that good, right? And so they are relying more and more on the LinkedIn recruiter tool where they're going to go out and pull or referrals, right? And so this is becomes where, networking is really the necessary step to get you in front of a person, right? Because once you get to a person, right, once you actually have a conversation with a, sort of HR rep or somebody, that process actually is pretty much the same as it was a couple years ago, right? So that is the game right now, is how do you get to a person? And again, easiest way to do that is networking. The other aspect, particularly given our community and our focus on executive roles, is especially as you go higher up, a lot of these roles are basically long gestation, right? So you have an idea, you have a new product line, you have an executive who's going to retire. The process for getting a job posting starts well before the job is posted, right? Which what happens is the job gets posted, but there may already be a couple of candidates that are in line, which means it's very hard to get it when the job's posted. How do you find jobs that aren't yet posted? The only way to do that is to talk to people and find out, which is networking, right? So again, the other reason to do this is particularly for the more senior level jobs, easiest way to find it is to get a network contact, but that also gets you the ability to find some of these jobs before they are physically posted, right? And if you can get in early, then you're already having these conversations and much more likely that you'll get into the later stage interviews and land that role. So that's the idea around networking. It is becoming more and more critical as part of your job search. All right, next question. All right, so and this is in the sales like interview side. Like so now you're trying to get the job. How do I answer an interview question such as, have you worked with X technology, whatever, where the answer is no, right? So the basic answer is don't say no. Do anything you can not to say no. So have you worked with tool X? No, I haven't. Don't do that, right? What you want to do is find out what's the best way, what's the closest way you can say yes. I mean, don't lie, obviously, like, but you need to think about your experience and say, okay, let's take an ERP solution, right? Have you used ERPX? Well, no, but I've used Y, A, B, and C, right? And so what you're trying to do is say, I have the capabilities that you need to do this. And I do because I have this collection of experiences. Okay, well, I haven't worked with that tool, but I've worked with this tool. And this tool and that tool are basically the same functionality, the same, financial monthly close processes, reconciliation, whatever it is that you need the thing to do. Do you know enough about the tool to know what it does? Do you know an analogy or an analogous tool that you have had experience with and that you will basically leverage that to do the work that they need? Because again, particularly with the executive roles, like have you installed SAP? like you're not going to be on the keyboard actually installing the software, hopefully, right? I mean, that's not the jobs that we're talking about, right? So the idea of you needing to know how to configure individual modules is not really the point. The point is, can you get this thing up and running and add the business value that I'm trying to add, right? And so you want to think about, okay, what is this? Have you ever, even a simple one, have you ever managed people? Let's say you haven't had direct reports, right? Have you ever managed people? No, I have not. Don't do that. Instead, you say, again, you got to think about what you have done, right? Have you managed a large project that had people on it? Have you managed contractors? Have you done X, Y, and Z? And so then you say, in effect, have you managed people? Well, the largest project I've run was, 12 people, and then I was project manager on that, and I've had, 8 contractors who reported to me. So in terms of, assignments, day-to-day tasks, managing, giving feedback, I've done all that stuff. If you're asking me about, performance reviews and hiring and firing, I haven't done that directly. I have been involved in the hiring process for X, Y, and Z. But you're basically trying to get as close to possible to saying yes without actually saying the words no. Now, if they ask you point blank, right, no, I just need a yes or no answer. Have you done this? Well, then you do have to say no. But your goal is to avoid saying no, but rather say, oh, well, this is what I have done, which I believe is the basic point of what your question is asking me. So are you asking, can I manage people and get tasks done through others? Well, yeah, because as a project manager, I did X, Y, and Z, and here's how I got things done through others. So you kind of change the question slightly and make it so that you can answer yes to the question that is basically trying to get to the question behind the question, right? Have you managed teams? Is an important piece, but what I'm really wondering is, can you handle people reporting to you? Can you give feedback? What if you had to fire somebody? What would you do? Like, that's what I'm trying to assess with that question. So go to the question behind the question, and if you can say yes to some of that stuff, that's how you answer those more difficult questions where the surface answer is no. Find the secondary answer that is basically, yeah, I can do 80% of it, or I've done 90% of it, or this is why I think I can do it all, right? But you always want to answer in the positive. You never want to say no if you can help it in the context of an interview. All right, next question. All right, so this is around results. So you're in the role that you want. How do I know if I'm spending my time in the right place? And this is particularly important for those sort of middle executive roles, like that director or early VP, where you're still responsible for execution, but you're sort of moving into that senior executive ranks, and you have to do both, right? Because that's just the toughest area, and that's obviously why we focus on that in the community. But that's the toughest because you're still kind of doing both. And the simplest way is to go back and look at your calendar and divide your stuff into very much execution and sort of executive, right? Whether it's strategy or relationship building, whatever it is. But like, look at your calendar. How much time were you spent executing things, getting stuff done, status check on issues, designing things, execution, versus executive behaviors, right? Which is really strategic work, vision work, relationship building, even some of the delegation and engagement with other sort of senior executives around, that would be sort of the executive work. And so you want to just go back in your calendar and divide it into those two buckets, right? And basically start to shift more into the executive side, right? And what happens is most of the time when people get promoted, they're used to being like 80, 90% in execution mode with, trying to be executive every once in a while with a strategy or presentation, but they're like 80, 90% over here. And they get promoted and they might do it a little bit. And maybe now it's 70-30, right? But your goal is to get it basically 60-40, 50-50. And really, most of your time should be spent on the executive function, right? That is the job, particularly if you're trying to move up in your career. So again, simple way to figure out if you are spending your time in the right place is, what is your baseline and how do you get more into the executive side of that? And again, just move 5%, move 10%. If you're moving the percentages, even, 1 or 2% a month. If you do that, that's 10 or 20% a year, right? And then, in 2 or 3 years, you move to full 50, 60%, right? So this is a long-term game. You want to move at least a little bit more every month, right? Definitely every quarter. You need to be spending more time on the things that will get you to the roles that you want to get to, which again, for our community is all about the executive roles. Okay, so that's how you know if you're spending your time in the right place. And similar question, next one is, what is the best way to see if I'm ready for the next job? Right. And the way to do this, right? I mean, you want to ask, you want to get feedback, but basically the easiest way to do this is to go figure out what that job is. You can either watch somebody in that job if you know somebody, like you're in a company, you're like, that's the job I want, find out what they do all day. What is the contribution they're making? Who do they spend their time with? What are the tasks that they're doing? What are the tasks that they're not doing, right? Or you can go to a job description, right? And you say, okay, I want to be a CIO. I want to be a VP of engineering. Go find some jobs and look at what the job descriptions actually say. And then you want to do a gap analysis. You say, okay, what do I do today? And then what does this job rec say, or what does this person do that I don't? And that's really what you want to figure out, because that's your gap. And if the answer is nothing, like, oh, I actually do all these things, then that's a good sign that you're ready. If there are things you're like, well, actually, have I crafted a multi-year strategy for a $100 million, product? No. I've done a smaller product, I've done a single year plan, I've done whatever. Okay, now you know what you need to sort of fill in. And then you look at your current work and you say, how can I sort of shift this, volunteer, ask my boss, find out how to get more involved in this area that I have a gap, right? So then it just becomes an experience gap closure. And then you have your target. And then you got to figure out how to go do that. But that's really the best way to do it, is literally find somebody in that job or find that job posted and do a gap analysis will tell you whether or not you're there. The other thing I will say is the goal is not 100%, right? Because if you wait till you're 100%, I would argue you've waited too long, right? You want to be 80+% ready, because you can always learn new stuff on the job. 10% you can absolutely learn, 20% you can probably learn as well. Much more than that, people will start to notice and you might seem unqualified. But if you're 80% ready, I would say go for it, because again, if you wait till 100%, you probably went past it. You don't need to be at 100% to get these roles. Nobody's at 100%. That's kind of the expectation. So do the gap analysis, but again, your target is say 80%, right? And if you're there, go for it. If not, what are the gaps? How quickly can you close it so you can get 80% or above? So that's the best way to figure out if you are ready for your next job. And the last question here is around executive relationships. And the comment was, I have a small group meeting with a new CEO as part of his tour. How do I best take advantage of that? So this is like, how do you build a relationship with a senior executive who is kind of doing a roadshow, right? And the scenario here, just to put it in context, right? I'm gonna answer it as if you're not one of the top 10 or 20 officers, right? So you don't really get to build a relationship with the CEO. Like hopefully you do, but that's not part of your day to day. So they're coming around and they're meeting people. They're the new CEO. So in this case, one, don't put too much pressure on yourself, because what's really going on is it's showing the CEO to everybody, right? So he or she is going to be meeting dozens, if not hundreds of people. They're not going to remember, like, unless they're an amazing people person, they're really not going to remember all of it. It's kind of going to be a blur. I've done some of these tours before. Like, you do your best, you try to meet as many people as you can, but it's really to show your presence, not to get to know 300 people, because you just can't, like, you just can't remember 300 people's names, or 99% of people have difficulty with that. So one, don't put too much pressure on yourself. You don't need to make a huge impression. If the CEO is like 3 or 4 levels above you, don't worry about it. But if you can make an impression, that's always good. It's always good that the CEO knows who you are. But they're not going to let do anything directly for your career, because it's presumably too many levels between. So what you want to think about is, you know, the default is, so tell me, what does your team do? What, like, I'm doing a meet and greet. What do you do for us? Right. And you're going to talk about what you do, which is fine. And that's what the whole sort of dog and pony show is about. But what you want to think about is, what do you do that might make it onto the CEO radar? And that means you have to kind of understand the macro business context. We talked about this in a previous Q&A, like what are the financials? What are the things going on? What are the priorities of the CEO? And then you got to figure out, does anything I do, right, have a direct impact on his or her success, aside from the good running business, general stuff? Like, am I working on anything, right? Are you working on a special project? Is there some, new product that's really key towards revenue and the 5-year plan, or whatever it is? If so, those are the kind of things you want to bring up. Oh, so I'm working on Project X, which I believe is a key part of your strategy. I'd love to hear what you think about the key challenges, or what needs to happen in the next 90 days. Like, you want to try to make a connection, but it can't be, hey, look at how great my team is, because honestly, that probably doesn't connect with the CEO's immediate goals. Like, running the organization is not a CEO's problem. A CEO's job is to pick the people who run the organization and then go out and talk to major clients, major investors, look at competition. CEO looks outward, right? So they rely on other people to run inward. So if you go, hey, look, I'm running my show, that's great. But that's exactly what the job of all the internal officers are, right? So you need to think about a scenario of, is there anything you can do and talk about that would connect directly to a challenge they have? Talk about a big customer, talk about, ask about competitors or things like that, or what are you doing to counteract something a competitor's doing, right? That is the kind of thinking you need to do. But again, not a lot of pressure, because if they're 3 or 4 levels above you, they will not have a direct impact on your career. That's just it's the 1 or 2 levels above that have a direct impact. 3 or 4 rarely can. If somehow they take an interest, they can obviously make major things happen, but it's just very rare. They have other things to worry about. You're not going to make their radar. So don't worry too much about it. But if you have a shot, try to come up with a creative question. See if you can connect the work you do to the challenges they have. And if you do that, maybe they'll remember you, right? And maybe that will come in handy down the road as you move up and you get closer to those ranks where it actually will have a direct impact. All right. So those are the questions I had today. Hope everybody has an awesome week. We will see you in the community. And if you have any questions, as always, drop them under this post, send me a DM, and I will include them in the next week's session. All right. Have a great week, everybody. Talk soon.